Welcome to Madison City Channel's Know Your Candidates interviews, co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Dane County. I'm your interviewer, Gail Bliss. I would like to introduce Jimmy Anderson, running for State Senate District 16. As we begin, I'd like you to give an opening statement as to your educational, vocational, and civic experience that you have, which qualifies you for this office, and why you are running for State Senate.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Gail. I first ran for office back in 2016. I had lost my mom, dad, and little brother was paralyzed by a drunk driver. And after going through that, I saw that there were some significant holes in our healthcare system. So that encouraged me to run for office. I was elected back in 2016 to represent the Fitchburg area in the state assembly, which I've been doing for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I had come to Wisconsin to go to law school, which I graduated from back in 2013. I worked for a short period of time as a director of a nonprofit organization that helped other victims of drunk driving. And I now currently work and continue to work as an attorney over at Laffey, Sobronic, Albee, and Bristow. And let's see, I think that's pretty much my entire kind of educational experience. And yeah, my 8 years in the assembly has been the totality of my time in office.
Thank you. Is there any process you believe the Wisconsin legislature should put in place now for redistricting after the next national census?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is kind of the beginning and end of most conversations when it comes to what kind of policy you want to get passed. Because no matter what you care about, whether it's healthcare or abortion rights or environmental protection, you can't get those things across the finish line unless we have a fair represented legislature that is not gerrymandered. So I believe very strongly in putting into place a nonpartisan redistricting system that would include individuals that would be appointed, that would take into consideration things like um, uh, the contiguousness of the districts, making sure that they're competitive from a partisan standpoint, making sure that communities of interest are being held together, and most importantly, keeping out the politics as much as humanly possible. So, yes, I believe a nonpartisan commission that is making sure that we're getting it out of the hands of the legislatures, out of the legislature in order to prevent them from taking advantage of the system and gerrymandering like Republicans have done for the last decade plus.
Thank you. What issues, if any, do you think you could work on effectively in a bipartisan manner in the next session?
Yeah, I think this is a place where my 8 years of experience in the assembly has given me a lot of um, you know, connections and relationships within that building in order to be able to work across the aisle. I had a significant argument with the speaker, Robin Voss, about disability accommodations. And, it was contentious at times. But the very last bill that was passed in the assembly this last term was a bill dealing with spinal cord injury research. And I worked with Speaker Voss along with many other Republicans that were co-sponsors of that legislation. And it was the last bill that was passed in last term. And it goes to show that even though there may be significant disagreements that I'm willing to fight for my constituents when it's incredibly important, I can also know how to work across the aisle and how to deal with issues. I'm hoping when it comes to things like funding for our local communities, especially emergency services. I have a bill that deals with making sure that we're providing um, uh, uh, services, or no, excuse me, not services, but if there are people who have heart conditions, if they're able to get access to the care that they need, I've been able to work with Republicans on those issues when it comes to the school funding and things like that. So very excited to work with Republicans wherever possible, but also willing to fight for the things my constituents believe in.
Thank you. What role, if any, do you think the legislature should have in addressing conditions in Wisconsin's state prisons?
Yeah, that has been a really difficult issue over the years. I think the first thing that we need to do first and foremost is we need to stop putting people in prison when they don't need to be put in prison. Someone has a nonviolent criminal penalty, I think we should be reducing the amount of time they spend in prison, finding alternatives to actual prison sentences. Um, Wisconsin imprisons people at a higher rate than most of our other um, sister states in the Midwest, while at the same time not seeing a significant reduction in crime. So we're putting people in prison longer, we're spending more money on these prisons, and then we're not seeing the benefits on the back end that Republicans claim to happen when there is higher levels of incarceration. So we need to make sure that we're shrinking the prison population in a responsible way, and then making sure that we're putting in the investments, not only in the facilities, but the individuals who are working in those facilities as well. So I believe very strongly in being able to put more resources into our prisons in order to make sure that they are humane, that they're treating prisoners as they should be treated, that the people that work there get a fair wage, and then make sure that the facilities are up to snuff as they should be.
Thank you. What role do you think the state legislature has in ensuring successful outcomes for all students, including those with disabilities?
Yeah, this has been actually one of the most important issues that I've worked on while in the legislature. I'm proud to be the lead author on a bill that would ensure that our public schools get 90% funding for special education services. At the moment, most public schools are receiving barely 33% of the reimbursement rate that they ought to be receiving. That's unconscionable, particularly when we've seen a lot of times with these private voucher schools, what they've been doing is making sure that individuals with disabilities are getting kicked out of their voucher schools and then having to go to public schools that are required to accept them. And then that increases the amount of money that these public schools have to spend in order to provide the adequate resources for individuals with disabilities. So I think that we need to pass my bill to ensure that every public school gets 90% reimbursement rate, which is what they need in order to sit there to provide the adequate teachers, programs, and schooling for those with disabilities.
Thank you. Are there any steps you believe the legislature should take to further address mental health and substance abuse disorders?
Yeah, I think that, the question as to how it is that we provide mental health treatment is a difficult one. We've seen since the passing of the ACA, some additional resources being put into mental health treatment, but the state has not done a very good job of being able to add on to that. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities to sit there and find places where we could provide additional funding for mental health treatment, particularly for young people. I think that we've seen that after the pandemic, there was a significant increase in mental health distress for people under the age of 18 and also our college age kids. So being able to target those resources towards young people that are going through what was a very significant upheaval in their lives and ensuring that they will have the access to the mental health treatment that they need in order to make sure that they adequately dealt with that trauma and being able to integrate into society going forward.
Thank you. What other priorities do you have for your term in office?
Wow, this is the big question, right? Like how do we decide where do we put our focus? Well, I think mostly I think I've talked a lot about issues around healthcare, and that's been where I've been putting a lot of my focus as being in the legislature. Going through my experiences I had mentioned, I just saw how many holes there were in the healthcare system. So I've offered a large package of bills that would deal with this issue, everything from having the Office of the Commissioner of Insurance being able to regulate and control whether or not health insurers can increase premiums and by how much. Making sure that we provide guaranteed coverage for people who are not currently insured, and making sure that any bills that they receive would be capped at the rate of at the Medicare rate. Also making sure that if people are being provided services, that they're guaranteed to be provided those services without having to, for example, travel 2.5 hours each way to get dialysis treatment. I believe if you're paying for a service through your insurance carrier, that you should be able to access that service within a reasonable distance. I also believe that the other issue that we need to handle is being able to guarantee within our Constitution the right and access to abortion and contraceptive services, and also services like IVF. We also need to make sure that our environment is well protected. I think we've seen after the PFAS situation, what happens if we just ignore a problem and don't address it at the beginning? It gets worse and worse and worse. And so I want to make sure that our environment is well protected, land and our air and our water. And then I would say the other big issue that I've seen after doing all the doors that I've done so far, and you can tell by how tanned my face is, how many doors I've done. But I want to make sure that our schools are adequately funded. Too many of our communities have to go to referendum over and over and over again in order to be able to provide the funding our schools deserve. I think that we should be using that surplus that we currently have in order to provide that additional funding to our schools. So that way we no longer have to raise property taxes on people in order just to keep our school doors open. So I think those are my big priorities, things that I want to focus on in the legislature if I'm lucky enough to be elected to the state senate.
Thank you. What would you like to say to the viewing audience as we complete this interview?
Yeah, I just hope that people would look and recognize first and foremost that, I have the experience to be able to do this job and do this job well. I think if we are lucky enough to get the majority, it may be for a short time. And you want to ensure that the person that's representing you in the state senate knows what they're doing day one and that they're not learning on the job. Second, I would say that if you believe in a true representative democracy like I do, 20% of our population has a disability. And I believe that I'm one of two individuals with a disability and the only Democrat with a disability or a significant disability in the legislature. That gives me a unique insight into how bills are passed, the kind of legislation that goes through, and ways in which perhaps individuals with disabilities are being ignored, or the ways that the disabled may be harmed by bills. So having my insight and having my unique input into the bills, I think is important. And without my voice there, I think individuals with disabilities might go ignored. And I would say, lastly, I think look at my effectiveness. As I had mentioned, Robin Voss, the current Republican speaker, tried to deny me my disability accommodations. I took them on, and we won. We were able to get those disability accommodations included in the new set of bill of regulations for the state assembly, which is going to open the door for a lot more people with disabilities to be able to run for office. And I think I'm pretty proud to say that I'm probably one of the only Democrats to ever get Robert Boss to do something he did not want to do. So, I got experience, I've got effectiveness, and I think I represent a community that needs a voice in the legislature. And I hope with that I have earned your vote, earned your trust, and I hope to do a great job as your next state senator.
I want to thank Jimmy Anderson for speaking with us and thank the viewing audience for taking time to know your candidates. I want to remind everyone that primary election day is Tuesday, August 13th, and the general election is Tuesday, November 5th. Every election is important. Please vote. On behalf of Madison City Channel and the League of Women Voters of Dane County, I thank you for joining us.